Great.
So people who came in the last few minutes before, I was asking everyone what department they came from. I'd love to hear from you.
I'm just from upstairs, from the viewer section.
Oh, fantastic, yeah.
I'm from politics.
I'm from over here in Oslo.
Engineering science.
Theology.
Sorry,
Theology.
theology, great.
Larry, there's 6 here.
Okay, let's make it 6.
Oh, so we've got a good mix of backgrounds.
Depends on the situation.
Oh, I like this one. Is it only for 2 years?
Yeah, interesting. It's terrifying. It's right.
I think we need to get it.
It's just about the machine and things. Just do things.
So maybe we should start. We've got this weird effect that everyone's filled up until they're kind of spilling out of the room, and yet the front seats are unoccupied. That's fine. So it's thanks everybody for coming. It's great to have such a diverse crowd, and I hope that you will all get at least something out of this seminar. I was going to start by saying a little bit about the Future of Humanity Institute. So it's part of the Oxford Martin School. The Oxford Martin School is this big institute which was set up about a decade ago and aiming at questions for the 21st century, and so forward-looking questions which aren't necessarily already well studied within academia. And the Future of Humanities Institute was originally got its first funding from the Oxford Martin School, and has since got a number of other sources of funding. Recently, in fact, it's been expanding quite a bit. So it's located within the Faculty of Philosophy, and Nick Bostrom, who set up the institute, is a philosopher. But it's quite multidisciplinary. We have my PhD is in mathematics, and we have people here in several in philosophy, but also engineering, neuroscience. We've had people in economics before. I'm not sure there's anybody right now. And people, even if they're just within one discipline, are also typically quite happy to go and seek answers and look for methods and knowledge in other disciplines as appropriate to the questions that they're trying to answer. So we're looking at these quite wide-ranging questions, like where is humanity going in the long term? What might society look like in 50 years, 200 years, a million years? A million years is so far out that there's a lot that we're just never going to be able to say about that. But surprisingly, perhaps, there are some things that we can say about the very long term. And perhaps because it's people here look at these questions which sound kind of exciting, the place can get quite a bit of media attention. I think within the humanities group in Oxford, FHI generates a reasonable proportion of all of the media stories. Neil would be able to.
3 on average per day for the last 2 years.
We're not always sure that those media stories are always actually helpful for the research effort, but at least it shows there is some broader interest in these questions. So people here have been talking to each other and going out when needed to find tools in other disciplines, but we actually thought there's a whole lot of really smart, engaged, knowledgeable people in Oxford. There's this fantastic community of scholars that we could be making more links with, and maybe some of them will be interested in hearing what we've been working on. And so we thought we'd try out this seminar series. So the aim of this is to let people know a bit about the research that is being done here, to perhaps pique people's interest in some of the research questions that we think are important and ripe for attention, and maybe then, if that goes well, we'll set up collaborations either between people here and people outside, or maybe people in this audience collaborating with each other. So the aim for today, I'm going to start by giving an overview of what the later seminars in this series will cover, and that will double to give you a picture of what research is done in the Institute. And then I'll give some thoughts on how these kind of fit together as a coherent whole, and what the challenges of these questions are, and what methods you can maybe use to make some progress anyway. I'm sure that I will give, this is like my perspective on it, and other people here would probably give a slightly different picture, but hopefully it's kind of useful. So, for the next 4 talks after this one, weeks 2 to 5 this term, we're going to look at where we might be going and like how we might have a big future as humanity, and then big risks to civilization. So these are topics which seem, if you think about humanity at a broadest level, then it seems important to say, well, where are we going? What might we become? Also, what might change the history? What might change the trajectory that humanity develops along? This seems like, at least naturally, an important question. And maybe you can't say anything about it, but it's perhaps at least worth a little bit. So next week, Toby Ord is going to look particularly at in the very long term, what might humanity be able to achieve? And I think he'll lay out some arguments that if civilization doesn't collapse and or technological progress doesn't otherwise cease, it's quite likely that we are going to be able to travel out to the stars. And if we can do that, then we can potentially have a tremendously big future civilization, which is spanning galaxies and spanning millions or billions of years. And those are numbers which are so large that they're hard to have an intuitive sense of. But under many moral views, if we could do this, that would be a tremendously... And so he's going to look at actually what views say about the importance of what we could achieve in the long run, and also actually what we could achieve, what assumptions we need to make about technology that would let us achieve that. And this is by, how can you even do this analysis when we just don't know what future technology is going to look like? It seems like, at least some of the time, although we don't know exactly how we can get there, we have a current understanding of roughly what things might be permitted by physics. We don't think that we are going to be able to travel faster than the speed of light. So, if you can travel at the speed of light, how much space can you reach? Or how much computation can you do in the long run if you think actually you can get valuable things by doing computations? Maybe because you think experiences in our minds are ultimately driven by something computational that uses energy, it creates entropy. Those are resources. How much of them is there available in the long run of the universe? And how can we access most of it and get the most out of that? May also be relevant if you think, hang on, we can go and, looks like we could, if everything works out okay, go and colonize the galaxies and do this. Does that tell us anything about alien civilizations? And if there were alien civilizations out there, what we might have to look for? It's extremely speculative, but the presence or absence of alien civilizations seems like it might be one of the things which has the largest effect over our very long-term future. So that's in the very long term where we're going, and most of the rest of the course will be looking at things in the nearer term, but in terms of their long-term effects. So in weeks 3 and 4, I'll look at what Nick Bostrom has called existential risks. And these are risks which could cause the extinction of humanity or otherwise curtail our long-term prospects and perhaps stop us from going out and reaching this cosmic endowment where we could go and colonize the stars. And he's laid out an argument that actually, from a moral standpoint, the prevention of these risks may be one of the most important things that we can focus on. I'll go through that argument, and I'll go through a couple of different styles of argument that you can use to but they're not what we should be focusing on. And one question is, can we identify any such risks? And we start thinking about this, people often think, what could cause extinction of humanity? Mind jumps to asteroids, because we've seen this has caused mass extinctions before. And indeed, asteroids are something that we talk about here, and we think maybe they do, as a society, as a global society, they do deserve a bit of attention. And they've, over the last decade or two, they've been getting increasing attention. We now have much better maps of what asteroids are out there that could potentially hit Earth than we used to. But we know that the total risk from asteroids is pretty small, because we can look back over the geological history and we can see that the impact rate of asteroids large enough to cause a really global catastrophe is not that high. So one thing we wonder is, are there risks which could be even worse than that? And over the last century, in fact mostly within the last 50 years, with the development of nuclear and thermonuclear weapons, humanity has developed the potential, a power which, if used in one way, might be enough to wipe out civilization. And so this is an example of a technological risk. We used to not have this power, now we do, and it poses a risk. And it's been somewhat managed at the moment, but I don't think that many people think that the risk of nuclear war in the next century is anywhere near zero. And as we develop new technologies and they give us often more power over the natural environment, there may be new unprecedented technological risks in the future. And as we're going through a fairly rapid period of technological improvement over the few centuries in which we find ourselves, this may be quite a bit larger than the risk posed by natural things like asteroids or pandemics. So we can go and we can, I'll get more into this analysis of what actually could wipe us out, and then also what can we do about it as individuals. If we say, oh, actually, maybe we should worry about this, is there anything we can do? Is there anything we can do at a societal level about this? I think there are some things, and I think we can. I think there's a lot that we still really don't know about this, and the field is still very young. It has been getting a lot more attention in the past year or even than before that, and then in the past 5 years than the 5 years before that. So it's really seems to be a growing area of attention, and that's within academia and outside as well. We've been talking to some policymakers within the UK government, and the Finnish Foreign Ministry as well is interested in these risks to humanity. So in week 5, I'll look at artificial intelligence, which is a potential future technology which represents both a big opportunity and a big risk. It could be quite transformative to society. There's a lot of things we don't know about artificial intelligence, about exactly what it's likely to be capable of and on what time frames. And it's possible that we are not going to achieve really powerful artificial intelligence this century. But I think it would certainly be premature to assume that. People used to say, well, computers, they're much better at us than doing arithmetic, but they're never going to be able to play chess. Then they used to say, well, okay, they can play chess, we'll work that out, but they'll never be able to drive a car. And we should be wary, perhaps, of thinking there are things that people can do that we're never going to have computers capable of. And as artificial intelligence gets more powerful, as it takes on larger roles within society, the future of our civilization may stop being directed just by human values. If we program something we tell a computer to go off and do something, now that's out there in the world, and if it's powerful enough, that may be something which affects the course of civilization over the short run and perhaps the long run. And Bostrom had a book released about a year ago, which was tremendously and somewhat unexpectedly popular. So it was Superintelligence, where he talks about what AI might do, and if it becomes in chess. We saw computers used to not be able to play chess at all. Then they could play. They were much worse than humans, and then quite quickly, over a very short period, they moved from a lot worse than human experts to much better than human experts. And we might have this happen in lots of other domains, and that might be quite important for then where we're going. Now, the worry is not about that maybe AI will be malicious or something, but just that if it's powerful and we've told it to do something and we haven't told it to do the right thing, that might create adverse consequences. We all know the story of King Midas, who makes a wish for whatever he wants can turn to gold. I'm assuming that our future failure modes are unlikely to be as obvious as that one, but we perhaps want to be careful that there aren't insidious failure modes in there. So I think that's something important we can look at. Okay, then in the later part of the term, going to look less at directly the things which might pose risks or might pose opportunities for us, and more at how we can make progress on this, or if we're looking at the long run, what that implies for useful strategies in the short term. So Anders Sandberg in week 6 is going to talk about observer effects and reasoning from these. So this is, you might think, well, we don't know how easy life is, we don't know how populated the universe is, but if the universe it's easy for intelligent life to arise, then maybe there will be more observers in the same position as we are out there in the universe. Maybe that means we're more likely to be in such a universe. There are other similar arguments that say if we think that the future might go that we have massive trillions upon trillions of people out across millions of years in a very large future civilization, isn't it a bit of a coincidence that we find ourselves in this first 0.0001% or whatever? Should that make us actually skeptical about this? Should that make us think maybe there's something which is likely to wipe us out? And this has some interaction with the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox is this question about why don't we see evidence of alien life out there, either perhaps intelligent life arising is harder than we might think, or something stops it from creating signals that we would observe. So there are some putative answers to that. I think there's other questions in that sphere that Anders will talk about, but it seems like it may be an important source of evidence for us about the long-run future and our strategy with respect to that. And there are some relatively philosophical questions that we can attack in order to try and unlock that evidence. In week 7, I'll talk about how we can, or how perhaps we ought to act in situations of great uncertainty. So for lots of these things, if we're talking about the future technology, and I say, well, we say maybe artificial intelligence poses a risk, there's a lot that we just don't know about this. And maybe in 100 years' time, we'll look back and say, oh, there's, those foolish people in 2015, they thought this might pose a risk. Of course, it never really posed a risk. There was all these good reasons why it was fundamentally a safe technology. But if we don't have access to these reasons, what we're thinking about is a kind of subjective probability as opposed to objective probability. It's not necessarily that if we reran history many times, the proportion of times that it would come out to be a risk, but the degree to which we ought to regard it as a risk. And there are lots of sources of evidence that we can use, and there are questions about how we can pull together these bits of evidence and in a way which isn't just, well, I looked at all the evidence and I thought about it and I came up with this number for the total risk, but it's something that we can actually communicate and we can criticize more and we can have a state of knowledge which we can build upon. So I'm going to look at both some of the theoretical tools for doing this and then also some more practical heuristics for how we can take uncertainty that's out there and we can take different people's beliefs and we can pull these together and come to something like a conclusion. And one source that comes in here is model uncertainty, where you might have a model and you think, look, we understand this, and the model says there's only a tiny, tiny probability of things going wrong. And of course, in that case, if something does go wrong, it's not normally much higher than the model said it was. And there's a question about how you can try and take account of that in your reasoning and how we can build that into our decision making, both as individuals and what mechanisms you can use to get that built in at more society level. Then in the last week of term, we'll look at information hazards, and these are times when it might be, normally society makes great progress by sharing information, and there's just allow us to live in this wealthy technological world and do many things that we used not to be able to do. And creation of knowledge and dissemination of knowledge is normally a fantastic public good. But in some cases, maybe it can cause harm. So there was a debate a few years ago when some people were publishing the DNA, I think, of the 1918 Spanish flu. And some people thought, actually, maybe this is socially irresponsible because it might lead to people going and downloading that and putting it through a DNA synthesizer. These are things which actually exist today and creating this strain. This is one example of an information hazard. There are a few other sorts, and I'll go through that. And also look at, in general, in the long term, if there's a discovery to be made, a technology to uncover, by the time we're here, we'll probably do it. So if we're thinking over the very long term, it matters perhaps not which technology. Eventually, they probably all will be. Anything that we could discover now, in a civilization with 1,000 times as many researchers working for 1,000 times as long, they're likely, or much bigger numbers, they're likely to get there eventually. But what we can perhaps affect is the order in which we discover different things, or the order in which we make changes, different kinds of change in our society, and that could have, that might end up steering which way society. Tool that we can use to analyze which paths and which levers we can pull on that might actually be good, as opposed to which might be harmful. Okay, so that's a summary, and I haven't covered everything that's researched here. There's a research group on population ethics, which Hilary is leading. And population ethics plays into some of those questions that I was talking about, like how valuable would some of these very long-term things be, that it tries to answer some other questions as well. So I was just going to take a few minutes now to try and give a little bit of a narrative around, I've talked about lots of different questions, lots of different bits of research, why I think they actually tie together and why they're all being studied in this one place. And I think that the common strand is that there are things concerning the longer-term future that seem potentially important and seem like they might actually affect decisions that people could be making today or in the next few years, and yet don't seem to have received too much attention. So climate change is actually something which is not discussed too much here, but not because we don't think it's important. We think it's tremendously important, but it currently receives a lot more attention in the world, and so if we can only push a certain amount on some things, that climate change isn't currently the place within. And these questions are also ones where we don't have fantastic feedback mechanisms. A lot of intellectual progress works when you either this is going to be a very kind of sketchy picture of something, but here's all the work. And over on this side, towards the left, we have better feedback. And when we have good feedback mechanisms, we can, in the world, we can go and we can learn a lot about this. So things down this left side, we've kind of, as a species, there's a lot of we still don't know, but we have been building our knowledge, and we kind of build it out, and now we know about this, and now we can go a bit further. And there's also another way that we can often get knowledge, where if we're doing things which are very you can get through a lot with just reason. So my PhD was in mathematics, is the paradigm example of this, but a lot of philosophy as well is, I guess this is like the complexity of the real world system that you're interacting with. you can make a lot of progress building up from the bottom as well, saying what can we just get at with reason. And there's a lot of things which are out here which we don't have such a good picture of, and don't have such good mechanisms for understanding and improving our knowledge, but they can be very important. And things in here can include questions like what might the world look like in 100 years' time? What might be important? And I think this gives an explanation of why they have traditionally not been studied within academia, because this building out on good foundations, either kind of logical, is a great way to make progress and bank the progress in and mean that you make lots of advances over the longer term. But we also need to make this in the next decades, which rely on better understanding of some things in here. So what we're trying to do is to use things in these different cases to get a better map. It's not going to be perfect, but we can have, this is maybe like here be dragons, but we can see the outlines of the dragons, and then we can try and steer around the dragons or something. And I think that it's very important that society does build out this stuff and this stuff, but you can make progress on this stuff as well. It's harder and it's less certain, but you can tell stories about the future, and then you can go and compare them with the things that we're actually very confident about, because either we can say, well, what's that assuming in terms of the things which we can test empirically, or in the reasoning, and you can critique arguments in these ways, and you can make progress with this more speculative theoretical things. We have examples in the past. I guess the theory of nuclear weapons was developed long before, or a lot of work before anybody was able to go and test this. And that was within the domain of physics, where we have pretty good understandings of all of the different things, and it gets harder when you leave the domain of physics, but it doesn't get impossible. So what kind of methods can you use to attack these? I've kind of hinted at one of them. I think that these questions are inherently very multidisciplinary, and so it's important to find out which disciplines have already produced knowledge which is really relevant for answering the question, and then going and getting that knowledge. And that might be by going and reading a textbook or a research paper, or it might be by going and talking to the experts in these domains. But and this is one of the reasons that we wanted to have the seminar, is that I'm sure that there are relevant things that some people in this room know that I just have not, I not only don't know, but I'm not aware of that there is a thing to know there. And then you can, so if you're looking at these speculative things, you can pull it back and you can compare it to where there is knowledge, and you can build up a better understanding of, okay, this bit looks kind of right and this looks robust and we're having lots of things that agree with this, or we thought this looked right and then we started comparing and it just looks like it's hideously uncertain, we should not be confident about that. I think that you can, there's also, there's a growing literature on how you can get the best estimates out of people on uncertain questions, and like what questions to ask to elicit good estimates, and then who to ask, and you often get better estimates by asking lots of people and taking an aggregate rather than just asking your top expert, and exactly how to do that. And so that kind of art of expert elicitation and aggregation is something that we can study empirically. We can have lots of questions which the feedback loop is short enough to work out what did work, give the better predictions or not. And so we can go and do that, and then we can apply the techniques which have been developed there to other questions where we can't test it so well. I should speed up. So crucial considerations is another topic that Nick Bostrom often talks about. And this is the idea that for the long-term picture, there's just a lot that we don't know. And it isn't the case that we basically have the right model of how all the different things are going to develop, and we're arguing over whether this parameter should be 8.9 or 8.8. And but that there may be factors that we haven't yet thought of that could totally turn this thing around. And so one thing we can do is we can go and look for these, and we can put attention into trying to identify what are the most important drivers of future direction, and try to find cases when you find an argument which argues that actually maybe what you used to think was the best thing to do might not even be good, or what used to be very good, maybe there's a dynamic which pushes it to being actually bad. So perhaps we used to think, I naturally used to think, like, actually generating knowledge is always basically always good. And this idea of differential technological development, after I got my head around it a bit more and thought through the examples, I did realize that actually it does make sense that if we just generated a lot of all the knowledge faster, or if we did everything faster, we'd just move along this, and that would have very little effect on where we were going in the long term. So it must be important to do some things faster than others, and that implies that probably in the short term there are some things which are bad to accelerate as some things which are good to accelerate. And that seems like it might be a really important idea. Now there's a question about how can you identify which things are bad to accelerate, and that may be harder, but at least you can spur the question and you can do what you can get from it. Something else that we often do is try and use quantitative methods for qualitative questions. So you might have questions like, is the long run important? It kind of seems qualitative, and you can actually then go and try to say, well, let's work it out. How many galaxies could we reach? Oh, that's quite a big number. Maybe maybe this future is going to be important. So maybe that's a bad example. Another example which I've given a link to here is Anders Sandberg. If you're thinking about the future of artificial intelligence and in general machine intelligence, one route which might get us there is taking people, taking their brains, having great scanning technology so that you can scan their brains in and you get a lot of data about all the different neural connectivity, putting that into a computer and having a good enough understanding of how the brain works that you can run basically the same process which goes on inside our head, you can simulate on a computer, and having enough computer hardware that you can do this at least as fast as you can do inside a person's head. That could be another way of getting intelligence within machines. And you start off thinking, and you think, well, maybe that might happen, but it doesn't sound like the thing that's going to happen anytime soon. And what he did in this paper was he actually thought, okay, let's look at what the key technologies are, and he identified 3 technologies: scanning, computer hardware, and the software, the modeling of the brain. And for each of these, you can look at trajectories of the rate of improvement, and you can look at historical trajectories, and you can project them out. And there is some literature on how to project these things out and how the uncertainty, you know, if you've got a few data points which look like that, you kind of, your first bit line goes like this, but if we've got to here, then the future goes out in some, you can draw your kind of confidence intervals on this. And if you do this for all of the technologies and you just run a lot of simulations of possible future worlds, then you can get an idea of actually, if we just assume business as normal in these cases, by what dates do we expect all of these technologies to have advanced to upload and a human mind? And you get an answer which is, obviously it's uncertain, but it's probably about 50 and 80 years out. And that actually is, now there's lots of things that might go wrong with the model, but I think that that tells us something that is much more concretely useful than we would have got by just kind of sitting around in armchairs thinking about, well, but that does sound quite hard, maybe we'll won't be able to do this. And it gives us an idea of, okay, so this is a technology which might be coming within the lifetimes of people alive today. There's perhaps a good chance, but it's probably not something that we need to plan for coming in the next 15 years. And you can also think about, is it likely to, this is a harder question again perhaps, but maybe important, is it likely to get there before we can just write AI, which is as smart as humans? Or is this likely to be the first way that we get really smart machine intelligence? Okay, so I want to get some discussion going, and the plan was normally for these seminars to just actually have some open questions that we think are important research questions we'd love to get more insights from. Because this has been a bit of an overview session, I haven't been able to get such good questions to attack, but I've got a couple of questions just for discussing here, and then a couple of very big open questions that if anybody does have answers to, I would be delighted to hear, or if you, maybe you'll go and think about it. So discussion question is just like, actually, we think that these questions are worth pursuing and important, but are we wrong? Does the lack of feedback mechanisms, does that ruin it? Or does that mean that it's enough to let the science fiction authors study these things and it doesn't need to happen within academia? And is academia the right place to do this? It's, you might, at the moment, society splits attention to these questions between mostly science fiction on the one hand, which comes up with the really speculative stuff and kind of exploring the space, and then decision makers in governments or maybe individuals, investors, companies who are having to make decisions for the long term, and they understanding, but they just go with their best understanding of what they can do. And then the open questions I've got listed here are, what crucial considerations are we missing? What just haven't we thought of that would change our whole approach? And also, what might be even more important to think about than extinction? So maybe, thanks everyone. Let's open it up for discussion on any of these things, or anything I spoke about.
So, I thought like crucial considerations you might be missing could be like wild animal suffering. I mean, so if you assume that you seem to assume that the world's going to be really, really good in the future, but if we sort of go away and start Darwinian processes of evolution on other planets or stuff like that, well, we don't do anything to counteract wild animals today, the future could be kind of really bad. So.
That's right. I mean, there's lots of questions about what might be morally valuable about the future. In fact, I think I wrote here and didn't actually end up talking about this existential risks without extinction. How could we lose the value of the future without wiping ourselves out? And maybe this is one of the ways. Maybe we do go and colonize the galaxies, but in some dystopian way. And perhaps there's suffering among wild animals, and that's really bad. And because we've ceded life to many, many more planets than otherwise would have had it. Perhaps there are other dystopian futures, but yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think the first point is important. Just to add, I think another perspective that is important is the question about how are we going to govern this long-term future. Because that, I mean, you mentioned the policymakers who think about the long term, but they usually have a horizon of 4 years.
Right.
Next election that is upcoming, what we want to achieve in that time horizon. I think the crucial question, that's where policy is really lacking at the moment, is what are forms of governance that can actually take into account the long term?
Right.
Because maybe taking care of the future in the form of democracy are used to at the moment. And that's not sort of to defend authoritarianism, right? But there's a tension there between democratic governance and that's just.
Do you know the answer?
But certainly not Putinism. That.
I agree. I would. I've certainly had conversations in passing with people where we make this point, and then none of us actually know enough about politics to be able to develop it more deeply. But I would love to have more conversations about that.
Yes, just building on that, what both intrigues me and kind of worries me is that one of the things I see missing, given the affiliations or backgrounds of people, is us. There's no discussion of human psychology in this, and it seems to me that that's potentially crucial. And if I give 2 very quick examples, what we know about people is that by and large we're irrational. We're irrational, don't think very sensibly about most things, and there are examples as long as your arm.
Yep.
Now, your model of how we get to the future is a kind of rational, but there's a big player in the middle of that who is demonstrably irrational. Now, how do those 2 things go together? And the second element of it, which is your governance, if you look at psychology, as individuals, we're not bad. We've got some errors, but we're kind of well-meaning. You put us in groups, and we are just hell on earth. The human history, just turn the news on every morning, is the story of one group of humans being nasty to another group of humans. Now, again, that's going to be going on while these technologies are unrolled. So having some notion of in building futures, what are our characteristics that are going to push futures in particular directions?
This is also really important. I think that one question is, are we getting better at not doing horrible things to each other? It's true. What are the drivers of that? Is that being driven by technological progress, in which case maybe actually speeding up the technological progress is helpful, or is it somewhat independent, in which case maybe it's better to slow down technological progress and maybe we'll be a more mature and wiser civilization by the time we get our hands on some of these powerful technologies later. I absolutely agree.
Sort of picking up on the first and third points, it seems slightly missing to me is a discussion of human welfare and happiness. So if you look at so whichever way you look at the data, it looks like in the developing world we're not getting any happier. So I kind of buy into the idea of kind of let's let humanity live for very much longer, but actually think hard about how we're going to improve the lives of people as they live those lives, not just trying to extend it. And it seems like we basically don't know enough, and we're not doing things in the right direction.
So this also seems important, though. And I would have gone into this if I were spending more time on the overview. I think that there is an argument which you can make, which pushes against it a little bit, which is if we're just right back here, and we're looking at the trajectory that we're going to steer over the next 100 or 200 years, and we think that might be, we think we're at an important time in history, and we might be able to, we might go different directions from this. If you're getting into the long term, I think there may be lots of problems that we currently have about societies where suffering that we are likely to be able to fix. And technological improvements and increased levels of wealth have improved lives around the world significantly. Life expectancies and healthy life expectancies are quite a bit higher than they used to be. Maybe it is correct to project that out and think that actually well, I'm somewhat optimistic about this, but I do think that there is a question there. Maybe I'm like, I shouldn't just be so optimistic. I'm just also giving my response to this. If anyone else wants to respond, then you should go for it.
I mean, another argument that might make future civilizations might be better suited to figuring out what makes people life and kind of optimizing that.
Right. If it's a kind of knowledgey thing,
So like
and that you can
survival.
go and study,
Yeah.
then many knowledgey things, we seem to be accruing more of this and getting better at it with time, and you might hope that we'll do that too.
But yeah, if there are lock-in effects, like for example, the wild animal suffering, then might be
But I'm trying to make this a discussion, so rather than preaching. But my understanding is we actually know what makes people happy now, or we know a very big factor, and it's called inequality. Inequality is the enemy of both individual happiness and good societies. I don't see a lot of design going on saying what we need to build are more equal societies. I think, I don't know, I would asking the question, in your world of kind of speculating about the future, does it make a big difference whether you assume that the future is one of increasing equality because we're driving that way, we're intending it to go that way, or one of increasing inequality or static inequality that we've got now? I just have to believe that there needs to be a design element in here as well as a passive technology will tell us.
Is about maybe what's happening in the very long term. If we're looking thousands or millions of years out, then perhaps reasoning about what we might eventually reach is more appropriate than kind of projecting out trends. But we're thinking of next few hundred years, then I think this is going to be important, both in terms of how good the lives of people they're living are, and also because that might be an important driver of where society goes after that. And so a society, I would tend to think that a society where a lot of people are happy and living happy and fulfilled lives is more likely to get its act together in terms of dealing with long-term. Maybe then we can stop having this big discussion. There are snacks and drinks. Feel free to stick around, get some refreshments, and we'll chat in small groups. I'm delighted to have lots of people tell us what we're doing wrong. So, thanks.